Hello friends, welcome to my channel, and in this video we will be talking about the French Revolution, and as per based on NCERT text we will be talking all these topics which you can see on your screen. So let's start with the first, Louis XVI and his empty treasury. So in 1774, Louis XVI ascended the throne, and he belongs to Bourbon family, and he married an Austrian princess, Marie Antoinette, at the age of 20 years. He got an empty treasury. The reasons for his empty treasury were he under him he he helped 13 American colonies to gain freedom, which caused 3 billion livres of debt, in extravagant living of the king, in extravagant court of Versailles. Large amount of money was spent, and long years of wars were the causes of his empty treasury. At last, due to these all, the money lenders started charging a lot of interest, about 10%. So, a lot of money of the state was spent in paying the high loans. The term old regime refers to the French society before 1789. Now, what was the division of society during the old regime? The society was divided into three estates: clergy, nobility, and the third estate was workers, peasants, and all the business class, worker class. The first two estate, the first two estate, clergy and nobility, the church, and the richer section of the society owned 60% of land, while 90% of the population was of workers, peasants, the third estate. The third estate lived in a misery. Why? They were the only taxpayers in the society. They were forced to pay feudal dues to nobles. They were forced to pay tithe, a kind of tax, to church. They were forced to pay taille, a direct tax to the state, and they were forced to do work in the richer families. So they were living in a bad condition. Now the struggle to survive, which led to subsistence crisis. It is not economic crisis, it is subsistence crisis. So we have talked about this. Now we were talking. So what happened in subsistence crisis from 1715 to 1789? The French population rose from 23 million to 28 million. Due to this, there was an increase in demand of food. This resulted in a price rise. Also, bad harvest meant a bad crop, and farmers hoarded the supply. Due to this, the supply was less and the prices rose more. Due to this, the poor section of the society were not able to keep pace with the situation. They were not able to meet their livelihood, and this situation is called subsistence crisis. They were living in subsistence crisis. Also, the richer section employed them but gave them lower wages, due to which the distance between the two groups increased: the richer section of the society and the poor section of the society. So this was all in subsistence crisis. I should change this. Subsistence crisis. So we talked about subsistence crisis. Now we will talk about the middle class and the intellectual causes of revolution. So due to as the third estate, it lived in a condition of misery, they revolted against the richer section, but due to their lack of resources and education, they were not able to expand their program. So this work of expanding the program was given to the better section of the society of the third estate, that were called the middle class. They thought that there should be no group in society that should be privileged by birth. There should be person's position should be dependent on his merit, and there should be freedom and equal laws and opportunities to all. There were many intellectual people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, and John Locke, who supported all these ideas through their works. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he wrote the social contract, in which he thought that there should be a contract, proposing a form of government based on social contract between people and their representatives. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of Laws, in which he told a form of government based on judiciary, executive, and legislature. John Locke wrote the two treatises of government, in which he talked about to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of the king. Jean-Jacques Rousseau also proposed the idea of one person, one vote, and one value. Now, their ideas, how their ideas spread, their ideas were talked in saloons and coffee houses, were printed in books, were enacted by plays, and were printed in posters, were read aloud for the illiterate. So this was all in first part. So now the second part is the outbreak of revolution. What happened as Louis XVI wanted to increase the taxes? He has to call a meeting of Estate General. Now I will introduce you to the term Estate General. Estate General was a representative body elected from all the three estates. It comprised 300 members each from first and second estate and 600 members of the third estate. What was that the third estate member were forced not to send any peasant, artisan or women as a representative, but their grievance were written in 40,000 letters. The meeting could only be called by the king, which was last called in 1614. This time on 5th May 1789, the meeting was called in the Palace of Versailles. And what was the fashion that the Estate General of First and Second Estate were to sit, and the Estate General of Third Estate were to stand before them. This was the condition, and there was how the voting was done. There was each estate and each vote. One estate, one vote. That one estate will give its one vote. So this time, the third estate representative, they demanded for one person, one vote. That was proposed, as we said, in the Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social contract. So one person, one vote. Louis XVI denied this proposal. So the third estate general, they walked out, boycotted the meeting, and on 20th June they met in the indoor tennis court of the Versailles. They called them as National Assembly and decided not to disperse until they have framed a constitution for their country. What happened then? They were led by Mirabeau and Abbassies. Mirabeau was a noble, and he was very much sensitive towards the third estate, and he gave inspirational speeches, powerful speeches. Abbassies was a priest, and he wrote a pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? While the National Assembly was busy in front making the constitution for their country, France, it was facing a turmoil. What happened was that a bad weather meant a bad harvest, due to which the supply was bad, and the farmers who did the supply, due to which the prices rise. There was an inequality, again a subsistence crisis, a condition like subsistence crisis occurred. Then on 14th July, what happened? The king's troops, they roamed in the city of Paris, and the natives thought that soon the king would allow its soldiers to open fire. So people, around 700 people, they formed a people's militia and attacked the government departments in order to search of ammunition, and they stormed the palace of Bastille, which stood as the despotic power of the king, and the leader of Bastille was killed, and the 7 prisoners were released. Then third turmoil condition was that the manor of the Chittox. It was thought by the peasant that the manor of Chittox would destroy their crops. So the peasants, they attacked the manor of the Chittoks, their houses, where they fired the documents in which their loans were written, and most of the nobles had to run countryside. Due to the due to the increasing revolution, the king Louis XVI, he had to accept the constitution framed by the National Assembly. And on 4th August 1789, this was done. The constitution was adopted by Louis XVI. It The main objective was to limit the power of the king. Also, what it did, it abolished the feudal system of obligation. Clergy too were forced to give up their privileges. Rithe and were abolished, and land owned by church were confiscated. So this was all happened. And 2 years later, in 1791, the drafting of the constitution was done, and France became a constitutional monarchy. Why a constitutional monarchy? Because monarchy was still prevailing, but the country had a constitution. So it is constitutional monarchy, and that constitution was publicly called as Constitution of informally Constitution of 1791. Now it divided the society in two parts: active and passive citizens. The passive citizens were all women, which though all women, men below 25 years of age, and those men who pay less tax, they had no right to vote. The active citizens were those who were all men paying with tax equal to 3-day wage of a laborer, and they had the right to vote. They elected a group of electors of 50,000 men, and they further elected National Assembly of 745 members. The National Assembly controlled the king and his ministers. Then a direct election for the judge was done by the active citizens. To get in higher and higher position in the politics, a person should pay high and high tax. This was the rule. But the Constitution of 1791, it disappointed the women. What was that? We will be talking later. Now, Constitution, what it provides, like right to life, right to freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law, they were natural and inalienable rights. So, done with this topic also. The third part, French abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. Now, the France became, in this part, the France will become a, a republic and having a constitution, democratic republic, we can say it, but not completely democratic otherwise. Now, what happened? Due to the developments that were taking in France, the other countries were jealous of it. So it was rumored that Prussia and Austria will attack it. So National Assembly voted in 1792 to attack for a war against Prussia and Austria. What happened in 1792? People came with all their will for the national pride, and in the city of Marseilles, for the first time, the patriotic song written by Roget de l'Isle was sung, and this became the national anthem of France. This was a time when political clubs became very much famous, and what were the political clubs? They were the groups made by the citizens to discuss their political actions and plans. And this one of the famous group was the Jacobin Club, that included the small workers and all, watchmakers, printers, etc. And this Jacobin name was derived from a convent at Saint Jacob in Paris. So their motive was to revolt against the society, what the society was doing. Now, what happened was that they were led by Maximilien Robespierre, and they were denied from wearing knee breeches, and hence they were called sans-culottes. those without knee breeches. They preferred wearing long stubbed trousers that were apart from the fashionable section of the society. In the summer of 1792, wait for a minute, let I cut it. In the summer of 1792, the Jacobins had the Parisians as they were living in poor condition. So what they did, they attacked the king. King's bodyguard were massacred, and king was also imprisoned as the National Assembly voted. The whole king family was imprisoned, and that on 21st September 1792, elections were held, and Maximilien Robespierre's Jacobin government came into power, and then the election was done by all men having attained the age of 21 years, and a convention was made, an elected assembly. It was called convention, and on 21st September 1792 there was abolition of monarchy. Uh, France then became a republic. Then on 21st January 1793, Louis XVI was hanged to death at Place de la Concorde, and soon his wife Marie Antoinette was also killed. Now, the reign of terror. What was that? As the Jacobin government came in 1793, it remained for 1793 to 94. What happened in him? That under him, Jacobin was anyone whom Jacobin government leader Maximilien Robespierre considered against the nation was arrested, imprisoned, tried, and if found guilty was guillotined. Guillotine, what is it? It is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. It was named after Dr. Guillotine. So, what happened? Anyone who was considered against him, against his government, against the country was guillotined, and the people were forced to eat the same kind of bread rather than eating the white flour bread. They were forced to eat a bread made of whole wheat, equality bread that was painfully elegant. Also, the churches were closed and barracks were opened in place of them, and the aristocrat titles of Monsieur and Madame were abolished, and titles like citoyen and citoyenne were came into existence. So this was all done by the Maximilien Robespierre, due to which his own party members became against of him, and in 1794 he was guillotined. One good thing that was done by the Jacobin government was the abolition of slavery, which we'll be talking about later in the chapter in the topic abolition of slavery. Okay. Now, as the Jacobin government, and the period of 1793 to 94 under Jacobin government is called as simply the reign of terror. Now, after the fall of Jacobin government, it was a good time, a right time for the richer section of society to take over the society. They introduced a new constitution according to which two legislative assemblies were elected, and then they elected a group of 5 people that was called a directory. Now, why directory? Because in the case of Louis XVI, there was a single leader. In the case of Maximilien Robespierre, there was a single leader. So they thought that the problem arises due to a single leader. So they elected a group of 5 people that was called directory. But the directory, it used to clash with the legislative and was abolished. So this resulted in political instability. Also, the voting right was denied, and it made only restricted to propertied section of the society who are of the age 21 years. Due to all this political instability, there was the result in rise of Napoleon. So this was all in the third part. Then we come to the role of women. What happened? What was the condition of women during, before and after the revolution? While men were at front revolting, women had the responsibility of the families. They were forced to work in houses of the richer section of the society. They were not given any political right. They were not given any opportunity to read, write, and learn, and to start any business. And also, they were paid. Working women also were paid lesser wages than their man counterpart. They were also they were also forced to marry against their will, as their father thought, and they could not demand for any divorce. It was only demanded by the men. It was the condition before the revolution. But after during the revolution, many women groups like political clubs, like Jacobin Club, women clubs were also formed, and one successful club was Society of Revolution and Republican Women. What their demands were, they were very disappointed by the Constitution of 1791, as it restricted them to as a passive citizen. So they demanded right to vote, to be elected to assembly, to hold political office, to get right to education, and all. This was during the revolution. What happened after the revolution with the women? Uh, After the revolution, many state schools were opened for women to study, and marriage became a civil right. The parents could no longer force them to marry against their will. Also, they were not they had the right to demand for a divorce, as the man could, and they were started giving political. They were not given until 1840, 1946. They were given political right. Until that, they were limited to a passive citizen, and they were then trained for jobs and become artists or run small businesses. So this was after the revolution what happened. But their struggle to get the right to vote, it continued until 1946, when they were granted the right to vote. Before that they had no right to vote. So this all done. Now the topic of abolition of slavery. What happened that the colonies in Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint Domingue were the main suppliers of commodities. But the European workers were denied. They didn't want to work there. So this meant a shortage of labor in the Caribbean. So to complete the labor, to mean this, a triangular slave trade was started between three countries, European countries, Africa, and America. What happened? Merchants from Europe, from French ports, Bordeaux and Nantes, they sailed to African coast and bought African workers, laborers, and packed them and sailed to America and sold them there, due to which this resulted in decreasing the shortage of labor, and the Bordeaux and Nantes were flourished with wealth due to this slave trade. This was called triangular slave trade, and this due to this slave trade, the ports of Bordeaux and Nantes, it gained its all wealth. Now, what happened was that this was unconstitutional. This was against the humanity. So many discussions were held in the National Assembly. Many discussions were held under Louis XVI, but no one could reach any answer at any end, because the ports of Bordeaux and Nantes, the big businessmen, they were earning their income by this slave trade only. But it was in 1794 when the convention under Jacobin government it passed a law making slave trade as unconstitutional. But it was reintroduced by Napoleon in 1804, and he made a right to enslave African Negroes for the merchants. The slave trade was finally abolished in 1848. So done with this. Now the last part of the chapter is the French Revolution and the everyday life. The what happened in this is that so if anyone wanted to publish his writing, to enact any play, or we can simply say that to express himself or herself publicly, he has to get an approval from the censors of the king. Now, after the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen in 1791, it was given a freedom of press. That meant that this censors of the king were abolished. Now, due to the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, it emphasized the freedom of speech and expression to be established as natural rights. The ideas were then didn't want any censor, and newspaper, pamphlet, book, they flooded in the town. Freedom of press also meant that opposing views of evils of the government could be expressed. So all this was happened in this part. Anyone can publish his writing, or anyone can enact without the permission of censor, so this can criticize the government. So this was all in revolution and the everyday life. Now the last topic, conclusion and the rise of Napoleon. So as we learnt that the directory and the two legislative assemblies, they too clashed with each other, and this resulted in political instability. Hence, the conclusion was the rise of Napoleon. Napoleon was initially welcomed by European people as a liberator, one who would bring liberty to them. But as he was increasing his power, he was gaining the side by European countries, and establishing his kingdom and making his family members as the king and queen of the one states. He also introduced a uniform system of weights and measures and protection of private property. Now, but his rule was started in 1804 from France. He was a Frenchman itself, and his rule ended when he was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So this was the rise of Napoleon and end of Napoleon. So French Revolution was an inspiring story for all the countrymen, for all the people across the globe. It marked the end of feudalism and brought a new era of industrial capitalism. All this is the impact of French Revolution on the people of the world. The French Revolution gave the term nation and promoted the concept of nationalism. Also, it acted as a guiding force for the people of colonies like India. Slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity were found, and it was very inspiring for all Indian men like Tipu Sultan, Dirozio, and Raja Ram Mohan Roy were very much inspired by this. If you liked this chapter, if this helped you, please tell me through comments and encourage me for making a similar video, a good video for the socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Thank you.